Hello, hi, myself Dr.Shivaranjani, Academic Coordinator, Department of Graphics and Creative Design. The next thing we are going to discuss is rendering 3D setup dialogues in 3D Max Studio. So here the rendering process plays a major important role in 3D Max Studio in order to outcome the image or the video that we have been created in your 3D Max Studio. So rendering setups dialogues in 3D Max Studio. So in order to generate images like the below, you can use this rendering setups dialogues in 3D Max Studios. So rendering setup dialogues in 3D Max. So rendering creates a 3D image or animation based on your 3D scenes. It shades the scene geometry using the light you have set up, the materials you have applied, and the environment settings such as background and atmosphere. From the rendering menu, select render setup. From the main toolbar, use the render setup, or you can also use render setup frame windows for rendering setups, or from the keyboard you can use F10 key. So by using these 4 ways you can enable to activate the rendering setup dialog box in 3D Max Studios. So rendering setup dialogues in 3D Max Studio. Rendering is a multi-threaded and multi-process on multi-processor configurations. The two processor or the dual core systems can render in nearly half the time single process system can. Rendering can also take place on multiple systems by using the networks. Rendering setup dialogues in 3D Max. So rendering setup dialog has the multiple panels. The number and the name of the panel can change depending on the active renders. These panels are always present, such as common panel. The common panel contains the general controls for rendering, such as whether the rendering a still image or an animation, setting the resolution of rendering output, and so on. Rendering panel contains the main control for the active renders. Rendering setups, additional panels can also be appeared depending on which the rendering is active. Rendering specific control can be described in the section. Additional render might be available as a third-party plugin and component. At the top of the rendering setup dialogs are control that, like those common parameters, rollout applied for all the renderings. These are described below. This is the option that has been available in the rendering setup dialog box. So the first thing is target drop down list. Let you choose the various rendering option. The first option you're going to choose is production rendering modes, iterative rendering modes, active shade modes, A360 cloud rendering modes, submit to networking rendering. So these are some of the options that has been available in your drop down list. So if you have selected the production rendering mode, it is a default one, while active clicking rendering uses the production mode. Iterative rendering mode, which while active clicking rendering uses iterative mode. Active shader mode, while active clicking rendering uses active shade. A360 cloud rendering mode opens the control for autodesking rendering color, cloud rendering. Submit to network rendering, submitting the current scene to the network rendering. When you choose this option, 3D Max open the network job assignment dialog. The choice does not affect the state of the rendering button itself, which can use still to launch the production, iterations, or active shade renderings. Rendering setup dialogs in 3D Max Studio, changing the rendering mode on the top menu, comparely settings on main menu, rendering flyouts. Preset drop down list let you choose a set of preset rendering parameters or load or saving rendering parameters settings, see the preset rendering options. Rendering drop down list. Let us choose the active renders. This is an alternative to use and assign render rollouts. Rendering or render iterative active shade buttons. Click to render the scene using the current target mode. Aside from network rendering, when active shade is chosen, the name of this button changes to the active shades and click its open floating active shade windows. If the scene you are rendering contains bitmaps that cannot be located, a missing external file dialog opens. This dialog let you the browser for meaningful maps or continue render to the scenes without loading the items. Setting views, setting dialog in rendering setup dialog in 3D Max view to render. Show the viewpoint that rends when you click the render buttons. To specify the different views to the render, choose it from the list or activated it in the mains user interfaces. The drop-down list contains all the viewports available in all the viewport layout. Each viewport is listed with the layout name first, followed by the hyphen and then the viewport name. For example, row 1, row 2, hyphen, friend. For this reason, the identify the viewport easily gives you the layout meaningful names such as close-ups. Setting up the dialogs in Max to lock to the viewport. Activating the different viewports in main interfaces automatically update the file setting if the lock to view the port is off. Lock to viewport when on, the views to open show in viewport list. This enable you to adjust the scene in your output visions, which becomes the active as you use on them, and click the render to render the various port you originally chosen. When off, the render always rents the active viewports. The next thing is your rendering dialog in presetting rendering options. Presetting rendering options are available on the render setup dialog box, the render frameworks and the render shortcuts toolbars. Some of the best presents are tailored for the relevant quick review rendering, other for slower but the higher quality rendering. You can save and load preset as RPS files. Render setup dialog, preset the drop down list, the new button of the panels, rendering frame windows, render the preset drop down list in the top of the row of the control, rendering shortcut toolbar, drop down list. Rendering setup dialog in 3D Max Studios. In addition to the default presets that we ship with 3D Max Studios, you can create your own. At the bottom, at the present level, to choose choices let you use to create your own custom present. The custom presents, when you choose the load present, 3D Max opens a files selector dialog that lets you to choose the RPS files to load. Each category corresponding to one panel for rendering setup dialog. Choose which panels settings you want to load from the RPS file and click load. Once you load the custom presets file, the name appear on the drop down list along with your default choices. Rendering setup dialogs in 3D Max. RPS file that provides the default presets or in view or in the render presence subfolder of 3D Max folder. We recommend you to save your own presets in this subfolder as well. If you choose at a different location, 3D Max saves the full path name. You can also use the configure user path dialog File open panel, render presets, settings to specify custom locations. Thank you for your patient listening, and if you have any queries, feel free to contact me at any time. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.